Okay, welcome everybody. We have today, Hiking Buddies would like to present to you one of our very special guests here. We have Jeff Fongemie of the Mount Washington Avalanche Center. As you all know, the mission of Hiking Buddies is to reduce avoidable tragedies through education, impactful projects, and fostering a community of support. So in that, we would like to bring you this outstanding education piece tonight. We're super excited. We have Julie alongside me. We're going to be moderating the chat. So if you have questions, please place the questions in the chat. We'll go down in order. We have a lot of people in the meeting today, so just bear with us. We'll have a full question and answer session after Jeff gives his presentation. And with that, I would like to introduce to you Jeff Fongemie. Jeff is the director of the Mount Washington Avalanche Center. Jeff came to the White Mountains area in about the early 90s, and for over 30 years, he's been participating in guiding programs, mountain rescue service. He's been on a couple of different rescue teams and a countless number of rescues. And we would really just like to thank him for his time tonight. And here we go. Jeff, take it away.
Thank you, Lynn. Thanks for the intro. Well, there's a lot of people on. It's nice to meet every one of you virtually. It'd be great to go through the room and say hi to everybody, but I think that's going to take a long time. So glad you guys are all here. And maybe I'll start out by saying the reason for doing this. And I'll be honest, we have a pretty good audience that reads our avalanche forecast every day, but what we're trying to do is expand our reach. We want more people to understand that avalanches happen outside of Tuckerman Ravine. In New Hampshire, everybody thinks of Tuckerman Ravine when they think of avalanches, but the truth is they can happen anywhere. Well, not anywhere. They can happen in many places in the White Mountains. So I'm glad you all are here. And I think the purpose of this is to, this isn't going to be the type of tools. I'm not going to give you the tools where you could, go ski the lip in Tuckerman Ravine and be able to make sure that it's safe from avalanches. This is only a start. What I'm hoping to do is get everybody here, and I don't know what everybody's avalanche education is, so we'll just assume that people have varying abilities, but I think what we're looking to do is get everybody on the same page where they just know what an avalanche is, they know where it is, and this may be the start of you continuing avalanche education, going out to get your level 1 and your level 2, or it might be the kind of thing where you just know enough where you can recognize a slope that could avalanche and you say, I'm not going there, I'm going to go someplace else, which is a perfectly fine answer as well. It's just an awareness. So knowing that if you're going to go on avalanche terrain, get the training, or knowing that you're going to go on avalanche terrain and just avoid it. So that's what I'm hoping to do. I'd like to go through my presentation, and towards the end, I'm hoping we have time to answer questions. I'd like to answer as many as I can. So let me jump in here. This is always kind of an awkward start. Share my screen. Lynn, can you see that?
Yes, I can see that, Jeff.
Let me start.
Perfect.
That look good?
Yep, that looks great. Thanks.
Let me give you a minute just to adjust. Oh, I'm backing up here. I've got to apologize to everybody. I don't know if everybody's aware of this, but we have kind of a weather event happening in the White Mountains tomorrow. We've got up to 6 inches of rain coming, which is about 80% of what happens in the entire month of December could come down tomorrow. We've been busy today planning for that. So I apologize for my voice being scratchy. Yeah, let's just start. Yeah, my name's Jeff. I'm the director of the Mount Washington Avalanche Center. And the first slide here, if you look at the dark area, that is our forecast area. We write avalanche forecasts that cover parts of the White Mountain, essentially the presidential range from Route 2 down to Crawford's Notch. And the Mount Washington Avalanche Center is a program of the U.S. Forest Service. I'm an employee of the U.S. Forest Service. People when they think of avalanches, they think of Tuckerman Ravine. Tuckerman Ravine is the birthplace of extreme skiing in the country, is what some people say. These are just some cool old photos, and I like to show them off. Mount Washington Avalanche Center has search and rescue responsibility from December 1st to June 1st in the Cutler River drainage. We take this over from New Hampshire Fish and Game for the winter months, and the slide I'm showing you shows what the Cutler River drainage is. It's essentially part of the Gulf of Slides, Tuckerman Ravine, and Huntington Ravine. What I'm going to do, I'm going to talk a little bit about our program before we get into the avalanche awareness. This is what we do. This is what we do on a daily basis. This is our website. We provide the avalanche forecast. So people can go to mountwashingtonavalanchecenter.org and they can find our avalanche forecast, weather information, observations, people posting information about what they see out in the field. We write about accidents. We have links to different educational opportunities, and we also talk about ourselves a little bit. So let's get into it. What actually is an avalanche? An avalanche is a mass of snow moving down a slope. In the US, avalanches kill 25 to 30 people and injure many more each winter. Some days are dangerous and some days are not. Learning about avalanches will help you decide when, where, and how to visit the backcountry. If you look at this slide, avalanches themselves are fairly simple things. In a nutshell, it's a bunch of snow stuck to a steep slope that may be sticking to that slope really well, or maybe not very well. All it takes is some sort of a trigger, a little bit more weight, and the whole thing wants to slide down. Pretty simple. Where do avalanches occur? Avalanches occur mostly during or just after snowstorms. Most avalanches occur on slope angles between 30 and 45 degrees. That little bell chart there, that little curve sort of shows the incidence of avalanches at the different slope angles, with right around 38 degrees being sort of the 39 degrees there being kind of the hot spot for most avalanches. What that means is if the slope itself isn't really that steep, the snow just tends to stick there. And if it's too steep, the snow sloughs off and it doesn't have a chance to build up. At between the 34 and 45 degree slope angle is when the snow could build up to a point where the weight of the snow wants to pull it down off that slope. This is, I bet, I'd be surprised if anybody in this group hasn't seen this video. This is a video from an avalanche. I'm showing you what an avalanche looks like, maybe from a skier point of view. This is an avalanche that happened recently in Mount Washington in the Gulf of Slides. A couple of skiers were skiing in the Great Gulf in this area called Airplane Gully, and they triggered an avalanche. I'm going to go ahead and play that. It's a little violent, but it's not too bad. Goes. That skier was hurt. He was hurt pretty badly, actually, but he ended up, he's going to be fine. He's in the hospital. He's going through a few surgeries, but he's going to be fine. We know who he is, and we've been talking with him quite a bit. This part of the slideshow is sort of the shock and awe, scared straight part. Oh, I have to wait for it to load. That is not playing. Bear with me for a moment. Let's see if I can make this play.
Jeff, while you're trying to get that to play.
Yeah.
So he had skis on does that give him any benefit as far as like flotation? Like if he didn't have skis on, would that have been much worse?
No,
It's just
no, not really. Skis don't have very much flotation. It's almost worse. He ended up injuring his leg because his skis, one of the skis didn't release. Um, Skis don't really give any flotation. You know, there's a bunch of avalanches are big and they're powerful, and they essentially they really they do what they want with you. There's this theory you could try and swim to the top, you know, so that you're at the top of the snow. People that I know that have been caught in avalanches say, yeah, it doesn't work. You're just at the mercy of tons and tons of snow. You could buy commercially made airbags, which will help you float to the surface of the snow. But floating isn't really, they don't work on the. It's not like a balloon in water that floats to the surface. A larger object tends to end up at the top of the pile if it can travel far enough. But you know, by and large, if you're caught in an avalanche, there's really not a lot you could do. They're just the best way to stay safe is avoid them altogether. Everything you could do for pre-planning, airbags, you know, figuring out ways to swim to the top, little devices so you can maybe breathe under the snow. They're all they add just a very small margin of safety. It's best not to get caught. I don't think this is going to play, Lynn. I'm going to move on to the next one. So if you watch that video, you can see the skier skiing down the hill, and you can see the slab released. And this little animation, it's kind of cheesy, honestly, but it does a really good job of showing you how a slab avalanche releases. So this blue part that you can see towards the top is the snow. The little yellow line is a weak layer, and that weak layer could be it could be very soft snow that's just sort of fragile. It could be maybe it's an ice, maybe it's like a frozen crust from a rain event. It could be anything. And all it needs is his impact bubble, if he could trigger that weak layer and make that weak layer fail, the whole slab will go. So let's see what it looks like. The red part is the impact that he has in the snow. He hits the weak layer and it cracks. And the whole thing goes. There. So what this is showing you is sort of the looking through the snow version of how one of the ways where an avalanche, you know, a large chunk of snow could start sliding downhill. It's a big piece of snow is sitting on a layer that's weak. If you could hit that layer, the whole thing goes. Why are avalanches so dangerous? And I chose this slide because that poor swimmer, you know, we found this picture online, and I'm pretty darn sure this is just Photoshopped. I hope it's Photoshopped. But if this were real, that poor guy in the water has no idea there's a giant shark behind him. And that's a little bit what like avalanches are like. In the world of hazards that you see outside, so a lot of hazards are scary. You know, if you're in a lightning storm on top of a mountain, the lightning is terrifying. If you're in a hurricane, it's terrifying. If you're in a flood, it's terrifying. There's all sorts of things outside that happen that are just absolutely, they're scary. You know they're coming. You just know they're dangerous. The thing about avalanches is that you don't know that they're coming. They sneak up on you, and then it's too late. And for people who ski, that's particularly dangerous because skiers look at a big snowy snow slope and they just have sort of a warm, fuzzy feeling in their belly like this is going to be great. And it could be great. And hopefully it's great, but it might not be great. You've got to be really careful. Big snow slopes are often very appealing, and we don't know until they're dangerous, until it's too late. What you can do is keep your eyes open, keep your ears open, look for signs, and just be aware that it could be a problem. Maybe like an example could be sharks. Let's just say sharks are dangerous. If you were going to go swimming and somebody said there's in a small little bay in the ocean, there's 50 hungry great white sharks in there, would you go swimming? You probably wouldn't. That's sort of what avalanches are like. If the avalanche danger is elevated, maybe it's a good time to stay off the snow slopes. And we'll get to maybe describing a snow slope that could be dangerous in a little bit. This is an avalanche in Tuckerman Ravine. This happened in 2001. Skier, if you look in the top right corner, sort of the top center of the screen, you can see ski tracks. Skier was skiing, looked like a fantastic layer of snow, made a few turns, triggered an avalanche, and he went for about a 400-foot ride to the floor of the ravine. He was not hurt. I think he broke his skis, but he was pretty shaken up. So this is Tuckerman Ravine, and people think Tuckerman Ravine avalanches. That's kind of a given. It's famous for that. This is the outcome of an avalanche. This is a rescue we went on a few years ago. This person was buried deep under the snow by an avalanche. Their avalanches are dangerous. A person that's stuck in an avalanche or they're beneath the snow has just minutes to be excavated to get themselves out of the snow, or they could possibly suffocate. So time is on your side. You don't have very much leeway if you get buried by an avalanche. You need to be either, this goes back to the previous thing I said, it's best not to get buried by an avalanche. So this is a wider view of that same photo in Tuckerman Ravine. So avalanches outside of Tuckerman Ravine. All you need is slopes in the, say, you need open slopes in the 30 to 45 degree range. This is an image that I made using the app CalTopo. I bet a bunch of you know what CalTopo is. And in CalTopo, you could choose to highlight different angles of slopes with different colors. So I went into CalTopo, and this is Crawford's Notch, and I chose to make areas in Crawford's Notch that are 30 to 45 degrees, that orange color. So potentially, anything in Crawford's Notch here that's an open slope, it's not, trees will tend to hold the snowpack. If it's an open slope and it's 30 to 45 degrees and there's snow on it, you could have an avalanche. And Crawford's Notch does have avalanches. This is a view of Mount Webster in Crawford's Notch, and all these gullies that are in here, these are climbers' gullies. And they're mostly snow gullies with some ice, but they are open with snow, and a lot of these will avalanche. They don't look very open from this photo, but they do avalanche in a small way within them. This is Gulf of Slides, which is the ravine to the south of Tuckerman Ravine. It's called Gulf of Slides for a reason. All of these paths are avalanche paths, and they will avalanche with some regularity. The Gulf of Slides is kind of a sneaky place. Actually, shouldn't be sneaky. It's named the Gulf of Slides, but there's a hiking trail. You could start out on a hiking, it's actually a ski trail, but people do hike up it sometimes. Or if you're skinning uphill on skis or snowshoeing, you could go up the trail, the Gulf of Slides trail, and the actual hiking trail will cross several of these avalanche paths, putting a person in danger potentially. The truth of it is that it needs a big snow year. It needs to be a big avalanche to go all the way down and hit the hiking trail, but it does occasionally. There's another view of Gulf of Slides. These are the avalanche paths. The hiking trail is down deep in the trees, but it's just above. It's actually crosses, like where the avalanche paths get real skinny at the end, the hiking trail will cross. Here is Tuckerman Ravine, and if I have a small group, one thing that I ask the group is I say, where in this photo can you get hit by an avalanche? And we have a lot of people, so I'll just tell you the answer. And for the most part, any place in that ravine, you can get hit by an avalanche. There's a hiking trail that hikes out from Hermit Lake to the bottom of Tuckerman Ravine. And right when the hiking trail starts to end, we call it the floor of the ravine. It's a big flat area. It's like a football field of sort of flatness. And we have hikers go up there all the time because they want to look at it, and it's for a good reason. It's pretty darn spectacular. It's pretty awesome to see. It's beautiful in there. But if the head wall has an avalanche, people standing on flat ground seemingly far away can get hit by an avalanche. So avalanches could travel sometimes further than you think that they will. I have an example coming up. So this is a video of skiers that are walking on flat ground. I think, I don't know who these folks are. We found this on YouTube. This is an old video actually, but it's a pretty neat video. They're on flat ground on the floor of Tuckerman Ravine. I know where they are. They're not that far away from where the hiking trail sort of ends at what we call a connection cache. I'm guessing they're going to go skiing. They've got skis in their pack. It's a bit windy, which is pretty typical for Mount Washington. But check this out. It's pretty neat to watch. And I'll just say that they're not hurt. Turn your volume up on this one. So these two guys were hit by an avalanche that came off the head wall in Tuckerman Ravine, and they were pretty far away from the head wall. If you're standing at the floor of the ravine where they are, honestly, it looks pretty far away to imagine getting hit by an avalanche there. It feels like the length of a football field. It's a long way, but it can happen. These two guys were not hurt. Same video. This is an avalanche that happened on the summit of Mount Washington. It is it's a summit cone. If you were hiking Mount Washington from the east side from Pinkham Notch, and you go up the Winter Lion's Head Trail, and if you follow the Lion Head Trail all the way to the summit of Mount Washington, the hiking trail is a little bit, sort of on the left-hand side of the screen. But this was probably 8 or 9 years ago, sort of a nice day in March. And it was warming, and there was a weak layer in there. And we don't know exactly what triggered this avalanche at the time. We believe it was a hiking group. There was 7 or 8 people that they crossed just above this avalanche prior to it triggering. And as soon as they made it off the top, the whole slope went down. And it was big. It doesn't look big in this photo, but if you were to look on the bottom, if you follow the red line to the right to the bottom, you can see people. They're standing on the debris, and they look like tiny little specks. They're teeny tiny. These are areas where people don't expect avalanches to happen still. This is the eastern side of Mount Washington, and this is a photo that we used in an accident report from an avalanche burial. In the center of the screen, it's called Raymond Cataract, and you can see a tiny little leftover of an avalanche. It's called the crown line, but that's not the point of this slide. There's 2 ways to get to the top of Mount Washington. Well, there's a bunch of ways to get to the top of Mount Washington. There's 2 common ways from the eastern side, from Pinkham Notch. And in the winter, or any time of year, there's a summer Lion Head Trail and there's a winter Lion Head Trail. The Winter Lion Head Trail is the red line that continues all the way up the Winter Lion Head route and then goes to the summit if you want to. The winter trail is a little bit nasty. It's got a kind of a steep part. It's a little bit technical, but it avoids all the avalanche terrain. It goes close to avalanche terrain, but it generally avoids avalanche terrain. The green line is a summer Lion Head Trail, and the summer trail crosses snow. You can see the snow fields where it goes horizontal, and those are avalanche paths. That sometimes does avalanche. This winter, in past years, we were closing the summer Lion Head Trail. This gets confusing to say. We were closing the summer Lion Head Trail in the winter because of that avalanche hazard. This year, we're going to leave the summer trail open, and we're going to warn people when there's avalanche hazard as best we can. It's also worth saying that our avalanche forecast is a starting point just to inform people of avalanche hazards. Ultimately, everybody has to make their decision. Is the Avalanche Center going to be absolutely perfect in being able to predict the possibility of an avalanche on that trail? Maybe not. We're going to try our best. But ultimately, it's individuals' responsibility to be careful and make their own judgment calls for crossing avalanche terrain. avalanche terrain, what you need. Let me go back up. What you need to stay safe is what it should say. 3 things. Get the forecast, and the forecast is a starting point for your own decision making. So what we'll do is we will write our avalanche forecast, and it will say something like, avalanche hazard today is moderate in these areas, and you could potentially trigger an avalanche. Watch out for this, watch out for that. And we'll try and guide people to where we think the avalanche hazards ought to be, where they're going to be. We try and give people actionable advice. So we may say, you could trigger an avalanche today on steep east-facing slopes at middle elevation terrain, meaning ravines. Make careful assessments or avoid steep snow-covered slopes on east-facing terrain. Get the gear, we'll talk about that, and then we'll talk about the training. Those 3 things are a good jumping off point to trying to make good decisions and staying safe in avalanche terrain. And like I said earlier, a lot of people here may not want to go down that path of getting more education, getting the gear, getting the training. For some people, just staying out of avalanche terrain is maybe the best way to not get hit by an avalanche, and that's perfectly fine as far as I'm concerned. This is what our avalanche forecast looks like. Once the snowpack builds up a little bit, we put out an avalanche forecast every day at 7 o'clock. It's a little bit hard to see. You can visit our website at Mount Washington Avalanche Center.org if you want to see more about forecasts. But we will write an avalanche forecast, and it's structured in a certain way where we start out, we say the bottom line is that's the most important part of the avalanche forecast, I would say. We work the hardest to make the bottom line as simple, clear as we possibly can. We're going to tell you what it is, where it is, and what you can do about it. The next sections below that bottom line are just supporting information. We tell you the hazard rating at the different elevations is upper elevation, middle elevation, and lower elevation. And loosely, you can think of upper elevation as sort of like all the summits and the presidential range. Middle elevation is roughly all the ravines, and lower elevation is below the ravines. Further down, we'll talk about an avalanche problem, aspect and elevation, where to find it, and the likelihood of triggering it. So it gets a little more detailed as you read further down. And like I said, this information might not be useful for everybody, but if you were going to go on a winter hike and you think you're going to be potentially crossing or getting near avalanche terrain, look at our forecast. It can kind of give you an idea of what hazards you might find. This is a video that's put out by the National Avalanche Center. Talks about avalanche forecast explained. I'm gonna play this. Hey, Lynn, are you still on there?
Yeah, what can I do?
Is my screen full screen, or do you see the header of my browser?
I see the header.
Let me see if I can fix that. For this one, sure. I feel good this is going to work.
Snow avalanche danger changes season to season.
Liz, do you hear that?
Yes, we have sound.
That's the answer I'm looking for. Thank you. Let me go back.
Month to month and day to day. In other words, each day is different. Avalanche forecasters track snowpack and weather conditions and provide daily avalanche forecasts for many mountainous areas in the United States. Avalanche activity is controlled by the interaction of 3 complex factors: the terrain, the weather, and the snowpack. Whether you are new to the backcountry or a seasoned professional, the avalanche forecast aims to make this complex subject as easy to understand as possible. The information in the forecast begins with simple summary messaging and progresses to more detailed, specific information. The first and most basic component of the forecast is the bottom line. This is take-home messaging for everyone, regardless of avalanche knowledge. The bottom line gives you simple information about 3 basic avalanche questions. What is it? Where is it? And what should you do about it? Think of it as a soundbite or a summary of the most important information for the day. Next is the avalanche danger rating. The scale consists of 5 ascending levels. Your chance of encountering an avalanche increases dramatically with each level. Many avalanche forecasts provide danger ratings for 3 elevation bands. For example, in this view, the danger is rated at considerable at all elevation bands. And in this view, the danger is considerable in the upper band and moderate in the middle and lower band. For a more detailed tutorial on the avalanche danger scale, go here. Avalanche problems are an extension of the danger rating. Avalanches come in many shapes and sizes. Avalanche problems allow you to better visualize and understand the avalanches you may encounter. This section illustrates the type of avalanche, where that avalanche exists in the terrain, how likely you are to trigger it, and how big it will be. This set of graphics is often accompanied by written descriptions and media that help illustrate or explain it. For a more detailed tutorial on avalanche problems, go here. The forecast discussion is an important catch-all where forecasters may provide more specific information on the snowpack, avalanche cycles, complex conditions, or other interesting topics that dive deeper into the what is it, where is it, and what should you do about it questions. Lastly, a mountain weather section is included because it plays such a critical role in both avalanche formation and trip planning. This section provides a basic overview of both the recent weather and the weather you may encounter. Each day is different. The avalanche forecast is an important starting point in your winter planning process. You are in charge. You make the choice. Visit avalanche.org to find the avalanche forecast for your area.
Lynn, that sound carried through the whole thing?
Yes, we had sound the whole time.
Thank you. So that's getting the information. This is getting the gear. This is a photo from an avalanche burial. It was a recovery in the Ammonoosuc Ravine a few years ago. And the person in that photo was using an avalanche probe to poke down in the snow and see if they could find a person. What is the gear? Avalanche transceiver. This device sends out a signal when you're traveling in avalanche terrain. If you have this device with you and it sends out a signal constantly, if you get buried, it'll continue to send out the signal. And the partner that should be with you having a similar device can switch it to the search mode and it'll receive that signal. So in the photo, there's a guy searching with his avalanche beacon for a buried person who's sending a signal, and he's got a backup companion with him with a probe ready to try and find the person and dig him out as quick as they can. These tools, by the way, are pretty simple to use, but you've got to train so that you're fast, you're efficient, and it's automatic. That's a probe. Nothing but a long stick that collapses and fits in your pack. You could pull it out of your pack, you pull a cord, it becomes a long, stiff stick, and you stick it down in the snow and you try and find somebody. Avalanche shovel. Once you find a person, you get your shovel out of your pack and you dig like crazy. You should assume that a person that's buried in the snow probably is in a blocked airway because of that snow and they're not breathing. So you've got to dig them out fast to save their life. These are all things that need to be practiced. You can't just have them, you've got to practice with them. Why does everybody need all three? Everybody needs all three because each person, you never know what role you're going to take. You could be the person getting buried. You could be the person doing the digging. You could be the person doing the shoveling. Everybody in avalanche terrain carries all three to be safe. I'll go back to my first statement that it's better not to be caught in an avalanche to begin with, but if you are going to be in avalanche terrain, make your best judgment calls, be very careful, and if it doesn't work out, maybe these things will save your life. Third component, get the training. learn how to recognize red flags, identify avalanche terrain, learn how to travel safely in avalanche terrain, and learn how to perform an avalanche rescue. Some of the items that I talked about earlier in the show, like how does an avalanche release, slope angle, all those components will be taught when you take an avalanche course. They tell you how to recognize slope angle, those tools to measure slope angle, tools to look for weak layers, tools to identify red flags. For instance, it's been snowing hard for 2 days. Could have an avalanche today, that sort of thing. All those things are taught in detail in an avalanche course. These are training resources. You can go to avalanche.org and conditions, education. They have a library with avalanche terms, accident reports. Avalanche.org, you could follow down through different areas of the country and look at avalanche course providers to take avalanche courses. And on our website, we have a tab at the top that says Learn, and we list a bunch of number of services in the area that provide avalanche courses. And this is my last slide. Point of this slide is this is our cabin at Hermit Lake, and I just want to let everybody know that the door is always open. If you're at Hermit Lake and you see us at the cabin, stop by, say hello, talk to us, ask questions. If you see us in the field anywhere on the mountain, you'll recognize our jackets. Feel free to ask questions or just say hi. And if you go to our website, you can see my email address, or you can send an email to snow@mountwashingtonavalanchecenter.org with any questions. And I just want to let everybody know that we're around. We love to talk with people about the snowpack, about avalanche safety, and we're here to help any way we can. So any questions at all in the future, reach out to us. We'd love to talk with everybody. I'm going to stop sharing my slideshow now.
Jeff, that was great.
All right. Thanks, Lynn. It's a lot to take in. But I'm hoping it gives people a pathway to either learn more about avalanches, even if you take a level 1 course. I think level 1 course now, maybe 2 or 3 days, depending on how it's structured. Just give you enough information to know more about avalanches and just don't tangle with them. If you don't want to take a course, just realize that any big open slope that's steep with a lot of snow on it could potentially avalanche in the right conditions. There's not a lot of hiking. There's a lot of hiking trails, obviously, in New England. Not a lot of them cross avalanche paths, and not a lot of them get into avalanche terrain, but they're around if you go looking for them. In Franconia Notch, there's several. Lincoln's Throat, it's not a hiking trail, but people do end up in Lincoln's Throat. If you're escaping down off of Franconia Ridge and you start walking downhill in a big slope, it can be an avalanche path. So, you might not be seeking avalanche terrain, but you might stumble into avalanche terrain. I think it's worth knowing what you're looking for. Do you have any questions?
That's great, Jeff. Thanks. There is one question in the chat, and Janet, if you want to unmute yourself to ask your question, you can. If not, I'll go ahead and read it out for you. Okay, so Janet asks, what is the rationale behind the decision to keep the Lionhead Summer Trail open this winter?
That's an awesome question, Janet. Thank you for asking that. It's a kind of a complex decision. We make these choices. Ultimately, we just want to keep people safe. We don't want people to get hurt, obviously. And one of the things that we realized is that there's no perfect solution. The winter Lionhead Trail, we would close the summer Lionhead Trail in the winter because of avalanche hazard. And when we close it for good, for generally the season. We don't open it and close it on a daily basis, trying to measure the conditions on that trail. So we close it as soon as the avalanche terrain builds up a little bit, and that's just it. So people are forced to, if they're going to choose either Lionhead Trail, they go up the winter trail. But a lot of people getting hurt on the winter trail. It's a pretty gnarly trail. There's one section on the winter trail which is real steep. Feels a little bit more like ice climbing or rock climbing than it does hiking. And we have a lot of injuries there. And some of these injuries are pretty serious. So from our side, we're thinking, okay, it could be a day where somebody might get hurt on the winter trail and avalanche danger on the summer trail could be very low, like maybe no avalanche danger whatsoever. So it seems like between the two, the winter trail and the summer trail, each of them have hazard, one or the other. And it felt like to us that if we just provide the information, we let people decide based on their skill level and their experience, what hazard they want to choose, if they want to go that way. People could also go, they can go up Boots Bear, and there's other ways to get to the summit of Mount Washington, but it felt like for us, it didn't feel right to steer people towards the winter trail when the summer trail some days could be safer. So what we're going to do is we're going to leave them both open. And when we think that there's elevated avalanche danger on the summer trail, we'll note it in the avalanche forecast and let people make their own choice. Jen, does that answer your question? Hope so.
That's great. Thank you, Jeff. Another question we had just come in the chat from Nathan. And Nathan, if you'd like to unmute and ask your question, otherwise I'll read it.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, Jeff. My question was, is there a certain time of day avalanches are more likely, or can they really happen with equal statistical probability at any time of day?
Boy, throwing the equal statistical probability qualifier makes it still pretty easy to answer. And I could say no, it doesn't. Well, yes and no. There's a number of things that could trigger an avalanche, and generally avalanches don't care what time of day it is, by and large. However, there are certain environmental conditions which could make an avalanche more likely. One of those conditions is warming from the sun. So if we heat a snowpack up, there could be parts of the snowpack that become more weak, and that snowpack could fail if it gets warm. So potentially in the middle of the day when the sun hits a snowpack, it is under certain conditions it might avalanche. But I think by and large, I think looking at the time of day is a really poor strategy to avoid the occurrence of an avalanche. I think there's a fair number of sort of myths around avalanche hazards. I remember when I was a kid looking at cartoons, you could yell really loudly and cause an avalanche, or if you're an avalanche trained, you should be really quiet so you're not going to trigger an avalanche. And that doesn't really make a difference. Avalanches don't care if you're loud, by and large. Nathan, does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Great. That's a really good question, Nathan. Thanks for asking that one. We have had a couple more questions come in. Lorna, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Sure. Hey, maybe you can hear me. I was wondering if there's any dogs currently working in Tux, and if there's been any, or what the history of using dogs for rescue is.
Yeah, dogs play a somewhat important part of avalanche rescue. We do not at this time have an avalanche dog in the Cutler River drainage that is with us all the time. And the reason for that, what's the reason for that? That's a good question. Let me see if I can come up with a clever answer. I think the reason for that is that to have an actual avalanche rescue dog, it's a serious undertaking that requires a lot of work, a lot of maintenance, a lot of care, a lot of training. And we as a team just don't have that capacity, honestly. It becomes, I could switch over and say that what we do have is we have a team of volunteers. There's a team called the New England Canine Rescue Team. And those folks have dogs that they train for all sorts of rescue, including avalanche rescue. And they are serious. They train all the time. They spend a lot of time with their dogs, and it is no joke. Just having a dog around doesn't mean you've got an avalanche rescue dog. So we've gone back and forth, and at this time we don't have one. And I think the truth is too that the first line of defense for avalanche rescue is always going to be a partner or two with an avalanche beacon. Typically in the world of avalanche rescue, dogs tend to be more for recovery. So if we need a dog team to come in for an avalanche recovery, we have that by volunteers who are very good with their dogs. So at this point, we don't have an avalanche dog.
Thanks. That makes sense.
Sure. Thanks. Deborah's got a question.
Yeah. Deborah? All right, I'll go ahead and read for Deborah. One of the photos you showed was a fatal avalanche in Ammonoosuc Ravine. Did this include the hiking trail? Can you tell us more about this?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, that's not a hiking trail. That was a skier who was skiing by himself. Remember, for an avalanche, I think he was carrying an avalanche beacon, if I recall. He was skiing by himself. I think he had avalanche rescue gear. I think he had an avalanche beacon. And the truth is, we don't know exactly what happened to that guy. He went out for a solo ski in the Emanusic Ravine, and he did not return. And by the time he didn't return, it was the next day before rescuers could go looking for him. And since then, overnight, before rescuers could go out and try and find that person, there was a big snowstorm and maybe a natural avalanche cycle. So he was found in something that we call a terrain trap. And a terrain trap is like a funnel. If you have a big area of snow and you let it slide down the mountain, but you confine it to a small area, that snow gets deeper. Like it collects the snow makes the snow collect in a sort of a deeper way than it would be if it spread out. Hard to describe. It's called the terrain trap. But he was buried, I think, under like 11 to 12 feet of snow. It's not a hiking trail. He was skiing.
Wow. Thanks.
Yeah.
Kristen, you have a question?
Oh, Kristen's got a juicy question.
All right, I'll go ahead and read. Would you advise people to stay out of avalanche terrain when it is rated considerable? Can you explain what factors go into determining that designation over moderate or high, for example?
Yeah, that's a great question. And no, I would not advise people to stay out of avalanche terrain when it's rated considerable. I rarely advise people to stay out of avalanche terrain. I think everybody should be able to make their own decision based on their experience level and how much risk that they want to assume. People could go out if you know what you're doing, if you're very careful. You could ski or hike or climb on a considerable day, but you need to be very careful and I would say dial back your ambitions for the day. People ski and people climb and people hike on considerable avalanche danger days, but they are careful about slope angle. They're very, very careful about where they go. They're careful about the terrain that they're in. You just have to be very careful about how you approach it and how you handle it. You need to be on guard for bad things to happen. So totally could be okay, but I think at that point you have to know what you're doing and be careful as you're doing it. Can you explain what factors go into determining the designation over moderate or high, for example? And that is a big, complicated question. Avalanche forecasters have a framework that we work in. I'll see if I can make it pretty simple. We have a framework that we work in that determines the different avalanche hazard ratings: low, moderate, considerable, high, and extreme. And those hazard ratings are determined from a sort of a matrix between size, sensitivity, and distribution of an avalanche problem. And you know what I could do? Kristen, let me see if I can do this real quick. What if, Lynn, can I share my screen again really quickly? This might be an easy way to answer that.
Yeah, please do.
Let me see if I can do that. I think I have a practical way that'll make it more useful. I'm going to go back to an old forecast of ours. This was from last year, and it was considerable this day. Let's see. Okay, I'm going to try and share this again. Apparently, I'm not very good at it, so bear with me. Can you all see that? Lynn, do you see what's called a danger scale?
Yep, we can see that, Jeff.
So I'll scroll down. This is our forecast from last year, Saturday, April 1, 2023. We were considerable on upper elevation and middle elevation. If you look at our website, right under the forecast, you can click on danger scale. And this I think might make it more meaningful to understand between the different ratings. Low is generally safe avalanche conditions. Watch for unstable snow and isolated terrain features. I'm looking at like the travel advice and the likelihood of avalanches. So can somebody trigger an avalanche on low hazard rating days? Sure, potentially, but they'd have to be unlikely and it ought to be small or else we've made a mistake. Moderate avalanche conditions, say heightened avalanche conditions on specific terrain features. So at that point, natural avalanches. So the difference between a natural avalanche and a human triggered avalanche is just what it sounds like. The guys that were standing at the bottom of the floor of Tuckerman Ravine and were just standing there, they were hit by a natural avalanche. They did not cause that avalanche. A human triggered avalanche is the video that I showed of the skier in Great Gulf. He triggered that avalanche himself. That's human triggered. So on a moderate day, natural avalanches are unlikely and human triggered avalanches are possible. Also with size, if you're going to trigger an avalanche on a moderate day, hopefully it's not going to be too big. That's what we're predicting. Small avalanches in specific areas or large avalanches in isolated areas. Considerable starts to get different. And I should jump in here and to say, one thing to recognize with this danger scale is that it's not linear. So moderate is not a little bit more dangerous than low, and considerable is not a little more dangerous than moderate. It doesn't take, each step from one to another isn't the same jump in danger. The higher you go on this scale, it becomes drastically more dangerous and drastically more difficult to manage and predict. So jumping back to considerable starts to be dangerous. We outright say dangerous avalanche conditions, careful snowpack evaluation, and careful route finding. Natural avalanches are possible. Human-triggered avalanches are likely. On that day when those guys were on the floor of Tuckerman Ravine and that avalanche came down and hit them on the floor, that's a natural avalanche. Could have been on a considerable day. I don't know what day it was. Small avalanches in many areas or large avalanches in specific areas. High is just plain dangerous. When we're in high avalanche danger, we advise people not to travel in avalanche terrain. High danger means that even the best people are going to have a difficult time managing that avalanche hazard, trying to stay safe. Natural and human-triggered avalanches are likely and very likely, and they're going to be big and dangerous. So high avalanche danger, yeah, we're starting to say people maybe stay home and read a book or go skiing in glades or hike on trails where there's no avalanche danger whatsoever. Extreme avalanche, extreme danger for our terrain, we haven't used that actually. There's a kind of a qualifier with extreme hazard having to do with the size of the avalanche and the distribution, and we're not likely to get to it with our terrain. It'd be great if we had a giant snow year. Maybe we would, but it's not feeling that way. So there's a difference between low, moderate, considerable, high, and extreme. Let me back out. Kristen, did that? I'm going to stop sharing. Kristen, did that answer your question? I hope so.
It did. Thank you so much.
If you are curious, for those that are curious about how we come up with hazard ratings, if they search the internet, you could read about the framework that we use, and it's called Conceptual Model of Avalanche Hazard. So if you search for Conceptual Model Avalanche Hazard, you'll find it. It was written by a number of avalanche forecasters years ago, and that framework is used by pretty much all avalanche centers in North America. And there's a reason why we use the same framework. It guides us to come up with a hazard rating, and it also allows us to have the same, or roughly the same hazard rating from area to area. So if you are used to what a moderate hazard rating is here in New Hampshire, and you go to Colorado or California or Alaska, moderate avalanche hazard rating means pretty much the same thing there as it does here. JL's got a question. Yeah.
Yeah, JL would like to know if there have ever been intentional avalanche triggers in this area.
Oh, sure, absolutely. We do it at work whenever we can because it's fun, and we like to make predictions to see if we could trigger an avalanche, but they're tiny little avalanches. One of the ways that we come up with the avalanche forecast is me and my team, we go into the terrain, and what we do, yeah, Lynn, thank you. We go in the terrain, we go into the field, and we're trying to find a place where we think avalanches are going to be possible. And here's an example. If we think that an avalanche is possible on the lip, like the very center of Tuckerman Ravine, the big bad part of Tuckerman Ravine, down near our cabin, there's a tiny little slope, and it's kind of a similar aspect. It's a similar angle, but it's tiny. So what we'll do, and it should have the same general snowpack in terms of sort of sensitivity. So we'll go to that small snowpack and we'll hike across the top, or walk on it, we'll ski on it, we'll jump on it, and we'll see if we can get that little slope to slide. And sometimes we can. It's pretty fun. But you know, it's a snow slope that's probably the size of like 2 cars. You'd maybe bury a squirrel, but humans are not going to get buried. So we trigger small avalanches all the time to just test theories and test the snowpack to see how sensitive it is. We do not trigger big avalanches. That's in the world of mitigation. And parts in the country, ski areas inbounds will set off little bombs to trigger avalanches before they open for the day, so skiers don't get hurt. And some mountain passes will have avalanche mitigation programs where they trigger avalanches. They'll close off traffic, they'll trigger the avalanche, they'll clean up the highway, they'll let cars go again. So they do that in areas where they protect infrastructure, but in the White Mountains, we don't do that. There's a program back, I don't know, in the 50s where snow rangers at the time were given, I think from the military, some big fancy gun to try and cause avalanches to happen, and that didn't work very well. And they were given an avalancher, which is a tool that's used at ski areas now. They were given a prototype, and the avalancher would potentially trigger an avalanche, but it blew up and somebody got hurt, so they stopped using it. So we don't trigger avalanches around here. That's a long answer, isn't it?
That's pretty interesting, the avalancher.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, it's still used today.
Interesting. I was wondering that myself, actually, if there were intentional triggers. So I personally have a question, Jeff. Have
Yeah.
you ever encountered avalanche or avalanche issues in, while you're out hiking or otherwise kind of unprepared for it?
Oh yeah. I personally been caught in 2 avalanches. I've been caught and carried in 2 avalanches. I'm embarrassed to say, but everybody's young once. There's a famous saying in the world of people that are doing outdoor things, and this could apply to lots of things. Let's see if I can get this right. Good judgment comes from experience, and experience comes from bad judgment. And I've made bad judgment calls before. I could tell you probably the bigger avalanche that I was caught in was at a place where I didn't think would avalanche. I was guiding at Crawford's Notch, and my client and myself climbed the steep ice climb. At the top of the ice climb, I don't really recall. We could have continued on at the top of that one pitch, but we decided not to. We ended up not going to the top. We didn't want to rappel, and we walked off the side, aiming for like the steep slope, sort of in the trees. And this is up by Mount Willard, and we were hiking sort of on a big ledge. It felt very safe. We got into the trees, and the trees were pretty spaced apart. Felt pretty safe. My client and I are walking downhill we're walking downhill in about waist deep snow. We're kind of wallowing, but we're going downhill, so it's fine. And we're chatting, we're having a good time. And the whole slope started going, and my client and myself traveled downhill in the snow, in the woods, probably for maybe 100, 150 feet. And neither of us were buried. We were up to our waist in snow, and we were caught off guard. I should have recognized, I don't really remember the time, what led into that, but obviously we had a lot of fresh snow. We were walking in deep, soft snow. It was a steep snow slope, and the trees were not spaced very close to each other. So, in hindsight, I should have recognized, but my guard was down. I wasn't thinking that. To me, it didn't seem big enough. It didn't seem deep enough, and the trees seemed like they were close together, so it wouldn't have avalanched. And also at the time, I was probably in my 20s, and I didn't have very good avalanche education at that time. Avalanche education has gotten a lot better since then. This sounds like an excuse, but avalanche educators do a great job now, and the tools they have are so much better than we had 30 years ago. It sounds like the story that, when I was a kid, I walked to school both ways uphill, but avalanche education now is really pretty great. I see people taking these courses and go in the terrain, and they talk, and they can make good decisions, and it's worth doing if you're going to be an avalanche trained. So yeah, I've been caught in 2 avalanches, and that was one of them. Still here though.
Wow, well, we're glad you're still here, and that's that's scary. I can't imagine what that's like, and hopefully none of us will have to.
Yeah, I hope none of you have to either. Yeah.
Yeah. And my other question is, outside of the Mount Washington area, are there other big hotspots that you track for avalanche within the White Mountains area?
Not directly. Our avalanche forecast area, like I said, is pretty much Crawford's Notch up to Route 2. We're responsible for forecasting that area. But that said, we do pay attention to what's going on outside that area. We get reports from people in Vermont when they trigger avalanches, people in Maine, Western Maine, if they trigger an avalanche, we often find out about it. So we don't forecast for those areas, but we do track them. And the reason we track them is because one red flag for can an avalanche happen is other avalanches happening. So if you were to go into one of the ravines and you witness an avalanche that happened or a recent avalanche that's happened, the chance of another avalanche happening is significant. So we look for data points. If somebody, Vermont had say we had a snowstorm and Vermont had the similar snowstorm and they're getting avalanches on, say, east aspects, we may have avalanches on east aspect. So we like to know about it.
That's great.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, I don't see any other questions in the chat. Julie, do you have anything specific you want to ask?
Too.
Yeah,
I know
knew you did.
we're a little running long here, but I do have 2 questions for you, Jeff, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Not to take up too much more of your time. The first question is, if someone is trapped in, God forbid, you witness an accident, how do you know? Is it safe to even approach? Is the snow stable after it falls, after it slides? And God forbid, like you had to get over there and you wanted to try to help somebody. Is that a safe area after it's already, slide? Or is it like, do you just avoid it? How do you know if it's safe or not?
Oh, Julie,
not that I'm going to go rescue, but
no, that's a great question. I would say it's a little complicated, but I'll simplify it. I would say, Julie, take an avalanche course. But to your point, you bring up a good point. So if there's a snow slope and it's a steep slope and there's a big pile of snow on it, and that snow was stressed, and something triggers that slope and it slides, can another avalanche happen in the same place? Maybe, but generally unlikely. Well, in simple terms, no. Once the slope is slid, it's probably not going to slide unless there's compounding issues you need to be concerned with. If there's a similar slope, what if there's a slope nearby? So you see an avalanche on an eastern aspect, and there's another slope nearby, and that slope is pointed to where you want to go. Could the slope that's like adjacent to that, could that slide? Potentially. If you're in the run out of an avalanche, it could happen nearby. Or if you have to cross under another avalanche path that hasn't slid, you could be exposing yourself to hazard. But if you remove all the other factors there's also this idea of we call it hang fire. There's snow left over up at the top on kind of a similar aspect up high that would potentially go, maybe. But generally speaking, if you remove all those outliers of different slopes that lead to the same area, or higher slopes above you that could also avalanche. If it's just that one slope, once it's slid, it's not going to slide. You could be on that slope and you could be fine. So that brings up a question. If you see somebody get buried by an avalanche, do you go over there and you try and help that person? And I think as a human, you've got to make that decision yourself. Are you going to expose yourself to hazard? Maybe. You might. I think there's no way around it. You could be exposing yourself to getting hit by another avalanche, maybe. But the other part of that equation, if somebody's buried by an avalanche and you decide to walk out to your car or walk to a place where you have cell coverage and try and call for help, that person probably isn't going to survive. If you're buried in an avalanche, your chance of surviving goes down by the minute. So if you're going to get that person, if you're going to save that person, you've got to get them out of the snow fast. So that's a decision I think a person has to make at that time. And whatever decision to make, you've got to either live with it or not. So it's kind of a complicated answer. and the more education you have will give you better tools to make that decision at the time. But I would say it's always better to fall back on this idea of, boy, don't let that person get caught in an avalanche. The easy thing is don't get caught in an avalanche in the first place. That's what I think that's ultimately what we're trying to do here today. But it's a good question. We think about that all the time as rescuers. When do we expose ourselves to hazard to save somebody else? And as a rescuer, you have a personal responsibility to yourself. You have a responsibility to your partner. Then you have a responsibility to the people around you in the community. And the fact is, that person who is avalanched, if he's just, member of the public, save yourself first, and your team, he comes last, generally.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Last question. This will probably be the last one of the evening. What is this rain going to do to all this snow that we're going to get?
Oh, I don't want to talk about it. It's not good.
I'm
It's not
sorry.
good. Yeah, no, it's not good. It's a good question,
No.
though. Yeah. Well, there's two things we have to get over. There's two parts of that. There's two answers to that question. The first answer is the near term. What's it going to do near term? And tell the truth, I don't know. Yeah, it's a little bit frightening. Rain on snow is very difficult for avalanche forecasters to predict. It acts in weird ways. The rain adds tremendous weight to the snowpack, and if you add weight to the snowpack, say there's snow stuck to a hillside and you add a bunch of weight, it could slide downhill. It could slide downhill on its own. 6 inches of rain is going to add a lot of weight to the snowpack, and potentially we could see lots of natural avalanches. Maybe it could do all kinds of crazy things. So the next 24 to 30 hours or so are going to be not great places to be in the mountains when there's a lot of snow around. I wrote the forecast yesterday and tried to warn people, saying that during the storm with all that much rain, it's just unpredictable. Probably a better day to go in and read about avalanche safety than to be out in the terrain tomorrow. So yeah, it could be dangerous the next 24 hours with all this rain. Unpredictable, we don't know. Big avalanches, no avalanches, it could be anywhere in between. It's just hard to predict. Long after that, on Tuesday when the temperature drops, I bet we lose a lot of our snowpack, which is kind of a bummer. If you're a person who likes snow, I'm guessing we're going to lose a lot. It's going to be warm. It's going to be in the low 40s all the way to the summit of Mount Washington tomorrow, plus many inches of warm rain. And warm rain will really melt the snowpack pretty fast. Calling for a lot of flooding. I don't know. It's not great. It's kind of disheartening, to tell you the truth.
Thank you. I want to personally thank you for being on today and just speaking with everyone. You've done a great job. And again, this just sort of sparks more comments, more questions, more curiosity, more resources to kind of reach out to. So thank you for, bringing that to all of our attention, and wish you very safe travels while you're out there.
Thank you, Julian. Thanks everybody for coming.
Yeah.
Avalanche danger is something that I personally take to heart. We try our best to inform people to make good decisions. And like I said, it could be getting more avalanche education. It could just be avoiding avalanche terrain altogether. And maybe one thing I'll leave with is that avalanche education is a great thing. You may choose to get avalanche education if you're going to be around avalanches, but I know a number of avalanche professionals. If you do this long enough, you take more and more avalanche education. You become engrossed in the world of avalanches. And the more you know, the more you start to understand that you don't know everything. So you start to learn a little bit and you think, oh, I could maybe be in avalanche terrain. I think it could be safe. But I know a lot of avalanche professionals have been around for decades, and they don't go in avalanche terrain after a snowstorm because it's just, they don't, ultimately you can't be sure that it's not going to avalanche. You could test the slope, you could do everything you want, you could make all these assumptions, and there's always going to be some level of risk with avalanches. And so I'll leave it at that. Just be careful of them. Don't think you know everything, and always be cautious.
That's a really good point, Jeff. Stay humble, or the mountains will do it for you.
That's right.
I think so. In closing, I think, one of the main takeaways was don't get caught in an avalanche, right? So number one, don't get caught. But in order to prevent, these things from happening, you should get the forecast, you should get the gear, and get the training.
Right.
So it sounds like if you kind of hang on to those three pillars, you can put yourself in a safer position. And Jeff, we really just want to thank you for your time tonight, taking a Sunday evening out, and for everybody that joined, taking part of your Sunday out. It means a lot to us to educate the community and be with all of you during this awesome presentation. We will have a recording available for anybody that wasn't able to make it, or maybe you jumped on late. And speaking of resources, Julie went ahead and put the Mount Washington Avalanche Center.org. She put that link in the chat for you. Also, avalanche.org for the National Avalanche Center is in the chat as well. And if you want to explore other resources, you can go to the hikingbuddies.org, hikingbuddies.org. And under our resources page, you can find other resources to check, such as, the Higher Summits forecast, New England trail conditions, and other resources that you should use. Each one is a separate tool that you're putting into your toolbox and taking that with you on every hike. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jeff. And I hope everyone has a beautiful and safe Sunday and week coming up. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everybody. Thank you all.
Bye.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Lynn.
You bet.